The Premier has been accused of misleading the Governor to hold on to power. Bitterness and recriminations have flowed in the wake of last night's stunning turnaround, which saw Labor returned for a fourth term. The Governor's explained his decision, but after watching power slip through their fingers, the Liberals aren't going quietly. State political reporter Rowan Dix.
In the cold light of day, the anger was still raw.
Mr Bartlett was saying, on one hand, I'll pretend to give the Liberals power, but I will also threaten to take them down at the first opportunity.
It can be very brutal, and I understand his hurt and disappointment at this point in time.
The Governor, Peter Underwood, has released his reasons for reappointing Labor. He's confirmed the Premier told him the Liberals should have the first chance to govern, but says it is not within the gift of any political leader to hand over the right to form a government, whatever the result of the election. Mr Underwood says he wasn't convinced Labor would support a Liberal minority without blocking supply or moving no confidence motions, and says that gave rise to a constitutional obligation on the part of the holder of the commission to form government. The Liberals have accused the Premier of doctoring his information to the Governor.
A transcript of an interview that was not complete and just happened to exclude that one paragraph.
The missing paragraph was:
Labor will only ever move no confidence motions in the most serious circumstances of gross maladministration, of corruption.
The Liberals immediately sent that quote to the Governor, but failed to sway his decision. When Mr Hodgman asked the Premier to repeat his guarantee directly to the Governor, Mr Bartlett wrote, "I have honoured my commitment in full in the advice I have provided to Your Excellency. I offer Mr Hodgman no more support than that, and have never done so."
I have never offered to hold his hand and help him form a government. I simply gave him the first opportunity to do so. He failed at that.
How can Mr Bartlett seriously say he was giving us an opportunity to test things on the floor of the House? He wasn't even giving us an opportunity to get there.
The Greens are facing their share of the music.
Nick McKim has unilaterally overthrown the will of the people and returned a government that he said was corrupt.
The opposition's alleging a secret deal.
I've had absolutely no conversations with any Tasmanian Greens. I've authorised no conversations.
No, I haven't spoken to David Bartlett at all about any of this. There is no deal.
The Australian Greens leader Bob Brown has also denied any involvement, and after years of name-calling, there's already a conciliatory tone.
It's a time for us all to put aside any perceived issues in the past.
I trust him on this commitment.
The Greens still hope to overturn some government policies in Parliament. The Liberals say that's presumptuous.
But we're not here to help Mr McKim negotiate through what are going to be the difficult parts of this new marriage.
The Premier is expected to reveal his new-look cabinet early next week and hasn't ruled out Greens being part of it. What a difference 2 days makes. Rowan Dix, ABC News.
Good evening, Peter G with ABC News. It's taken almost 3 weeks, but Tasmania finally has a new government, at least for the time being. Less than an hour ago, David Bartlett called a news conference to announce he had agreed to test support for Labor's minority government on the floor of Parliament. The request was made late this afternoon by the Governor, Peter Underwood. It came after the Greens earlier in the day surprised both major parties by agreeing to back Labor. The Liberal leader, Will Hodgman, has already branded Labor's return to power dishonourable. State political reporter Rowan Dix has been at the Premier's news conference.
Good evening, Peter. What a climax to a tumultuous 48 hours in state politics. As you say, David Bartlett sent back to the Parliament to test his numbers as Premier. In the end, it seems to come down to promises over supply and confidence. From what we can understand, the opposition leader Will Hodgman yesterday in his negotiations with the Governor asked whether Labor had guaranteed supply and confidence. The Governor said that he hadn't received those directly, so Will Hodgman wrote to David Bartlett asking him to give those guarantees. The Premier wrote to the Governor but didn't make those guarantees. They weren't forthcoming, and so in the end the Governor has obviously seen the safe and stable option to reappoint David Bartlett and Labor back into government. Now the Liberals are already crying foul, as you said, and accusing the Premier of treachery, accusing him of going back on the promise that he made during the election campaign. David Bartlett has already strenuously denied that. Here's a little bit of what the Premier had to say a short time ago.
It is a responsibility, a duty that I take extremely seriously, and my firm commitment to Tasmanians. The thing I most want to say to Tasmanians is I will do everything I can to make this work. This is too important to not allow it to work. Jobs are at stake, our economy is at stake, the future of Tasmania is at stake, and I know I have a strong and firm and challenging responsibility and duty to make it work. I kept my commitment to the Tasmanian people that in the event of a 10-10 result, with the Liberals receiving more of the overall popular vote, I would give the Liberals, via my advice to His Excellency, the opportunity, I should say the first opportunity, to form a government. Will Hodgman has been unable to do so. But, therefore, the responsibility rests with me to form a government, and that is exactly what I intend to do. And I intend to make the government work in the interests of all Tasmanians for the next 4 years.
Now, that stunning climax to the day came after a really amazing 48 hours in politics, and especially today, this morning, when the Greens stole the limelight with a remarkable position that they came out with this morning that may well, we don't know for sure, but may well have influenced the final outcome. And so this is how the day unfolded. In a stunning twist, the Greens came off the sidelines to send the Governor a loud message. Having all but given up on a formal agreement, the party unveiled a pivotal backup plan.
We will not move no confidence or support a no confidence motion in the current government, except in the case of gross malfeasance or corruption.
The Liberals got no such guarantee. Nick McKim says it's all about stability, not favouritism.
From our point of view, there's no point in changing government for the sake of it.
But he says the Greens would vote their own way in Parliament and still plan to overturn government policies.
So if there is a case-by-case agreement with, for example, the Liberal Party on Tasmania tomorrow, then the legislation will move through the House.
The Liberals are fuming, but say they won't be blackmailed into a deal.
If the Liberal Party want to deliver the real change they promised to the Tasmanian people, they should show the maturity required to enter into good faith negotiations.
Public servants were taking nothing for granted, removing official documents this morning. With retaining government suddenly a big possibility, new Labor members were on the run.
We'll have to have a meeting first.
When's that meeting going to be?
It'll be today.
So it proved a few hours later as a lone figure emerged from caucus.
I really have no comment, thanks.
By 4 o'clock, the Liberal leader was called to another meeting at Government House and still holding his tongue.
Not able to comment, I'm sorry.
The caretaker Premier quickly followed and was told to keep his job after an incredible 24 hours in Tasmanian politics.
After virtually claiming victory 3 weeks ago, it must be a hollow feeling tonight for Will Hodgman.
Well, exactly, and Will Hodgman was very angry and very deflated and making several quite severe accusations when we saw him. Here's a little bit of what he had to say a short time ago.
The reason we have a Labor Green government is that Mr Bartlett has broken his promises. He broke his promise to let the party with the most votes govern Tasmania. He broke his promise to not move a motion of no confidence, and he broke his promise on supply. And Mr McKim, despite all that he has said during this election, has sold out to Labor. So on day one, Tasmanians know that they have a government that has been built on deceit and lies. It has no moral authority, it has no integrity. On behalf of Tasmanians who are disgusted by these events, we will be moving a motion of no confidence immediately in this illegitimate government that is based on dishonesty, lies and deception.
Very fired up Will Hodgman. The big test will be when Parliament sits. When will that be, Rowan?
Well, from asking the Premier that this evening, he says as soon as practicable, so it's not clear when that'll be, and obviously it won't be immediate, so there'll be plenty of recrimination and accusations flying back and forth in the days before that happens. What we do know for sure, as we just heard, is on the first day of Parliament, the Liberals will be moving a no-confidence motion in the minority Labor government, but given what the Greens said today and the pledges they made, that's almost assured, almost certain to fail.
With a new state government expected to be formed in the next few days, the Greens have made one last effort to raise the stakes. Nick McKim's warned the new government could face motions of no confidence if it doesn't talk with the Greens.
Sick of waiting for the phone to ring, the Greens have made a last-ditch push for a seat at the table. Nick McKim has written to the party leaders seeking urgent talks. He's promised to pass budgets no matter what, but won't rule out no confidence motions without a formal agreement.
I'm not going to hypothesise today about what might happen in the future.
The Liberals expect to govern by the end of the week and have again ruled out any deal with the Greens. The Premier, David Bartlett, has insisted he can't govern in minority because the Liberals and Greens moved a no-confidence motion 5 months ago over the bungled effort to restore Richard McCready as Police Commissioner. Mr McKim says that motion's now irrelevant.
We don't resolve from it in any way, but this is a new Parliament. We've had an election since the no-confidence motion, and it remains entirely open to us to offer guarantees of support to the existing government, a Labor government, if that's the way the Governor decides to go.
Time is running out for the Greens. The polls are declared tomorrow, confirming the makeup of Parliament, and the Premier is expected to visit the Governor by late afternoon. 3 scenarios could play out. In one, the Governor takes Mr Bartlett's advice and invites the Liberals to form a government, or the Governor could send Mr Bartlett back to Parliament as Premier to test his support on the floor of Parliament. Or he could seek assurances from all parties about how they'd achieve stable government. The former Greens leader Christine Milne has confirmed she wasn't required to give any guarantees about supporting the governing party when Tony Rundle took minority government for the Liberals 14 years ago. With the major parties having only 10 members in the House of Assembly, several upper house independents believe they should be ministers.
You don't have people being dragged off the street to run a company and immediately be put in as CEO when you're looking at a budget as big as $4.2 billion. You don't do that.
There is a precedent for independent frontbenchers, as government leaders in the upper house, Tony Fletcher and Peter MacKay, were independent members in a Liberal cabinet for several years.
I certainly don't think that it would be contrary to what the electorate have said in relation to the vote that we've just seen.
The Liberal leader, Will Hodgman, has ruled out Green ministers and won't comment on having independents until he's confirmed as Premier. He met the head of the Premier's department this morning to discuss transition arrangements. With a crucial COAG meeting next week, Mr Hodgman's also expected to meet the Federal Health Minister Nicola Roxon in the next few days if he's Premier. Rowan Dix, ABC News.
It's yet to take its bat and ball, but Walker Corporation's launched a very public tantrum. The developers lashed the Planning Commission for criticising its Ralphs Bay proposal even before the final decision's been made. The company's demanding another chance to put its case amid accusations of bias and incompetence.
Its dream is all but dead, but Walker's not going quietly. The Planning Commission's draft report gave its $300 million canal estate a big thumbs down, but the final verdict is yet to come. Despite promising to accept the umpire's decision, the company's launched a bitter attack, saying it questions the true independence of the TPC and has no confidence as to the accuracy of the report. Walker didn't return calls today, but its response to the draft report does all the talking. The company's demanding a second round of hearings, saying the initial report takes an approach that's overtly cautious and inherently negative and contains numerous and clear errors of fact.
I don't think they made any case at all. The case they made was that they were upset, basically. The submission they've made is muddled and garbled and confused.
After checking recordings of the hearings, Walker says the panel ignored expert advice and preferred the views of unqualified and biased witnesses. It implies the Commissioners already had views on the project and were looking for excuses to reject it.
Walker have very clearly now attacked the independent umpire and in fact attacked the independence of the independent umpire. It's of nothing more than sour grapes from a company that's renowned for this kind of behaviour.
Walker also implies the Commission may have leaked information to opponents and the media.
They have no interest in the wishes of the community and their only desire is to win at any cost.
A spokesman for the Planning Minister, David Llewellyn, says he can't comment while the project is still being assessed. The Planning Commission says the assessment panel will meet next week to consider Walker's complaints. Rowan Dix, ABC News.
It was also the climax of the campaign for angry teachers. Hundreds of college staff converged on State Parliament, vowing to hurt the Premier at the ballot box and wind back his education changes.
It was a long-awaited day of reckoning as angry college teachers came to savage Tasmania tomorrow.
We've got to make sure that those people that created this are not involved at all in the solution.
They heard of desperate staff and polytechnic students being teased on buses. The union still says it won't take sides, but the sentiment was clear.
I'm voting Greens now, and if it's quite all right, and Liberal maybe now that they've got it right, I'm over Labor. Can't be allowed their own way.
Up to 1,200 teachers had been expected, but only a quarter showed up. While opposition MPs rallied the crowd, Labor wasn't invited, prompting queries from the Premier's office.
I said, do you really want him to be invited here when it's going to be a very angry crowd?
David Bartlett's still defiant, dismissing the event as a Greens rally.
I hear directly back from teachers at the grassroots that actually they don't want a rollback. What they want to do is get this new system right.
With less than a week to turn the tide, Mr Bartlett returned to his childhood home and former neighbours for solace. He needs to pick up almost every wavering voter to stay in power.
That's why over the next 5 days I'll be doing over 50 events and being in all 5 electorates across the state.
No wonder minority government's in the firing line. The final campaign poll in the Sunday Examiner shows both major parties still sliding and even more voters struggling to make up their mind. Despite big movement in some seats, it's odds on for a hung parliament.
I think Tasmanians are sick of negative politics. They want positive propositional solutions that address real issues like household budgets and cost of living.
Labor's dismissed the opposition's promise of free primary education, saying it's a hoax aimed at wealthy families and would cut vital funding.
Under our policies, the least advantaged families in Tasmania don't pay any school fees. Some 40% of Tasmanian families.
The sprint to the finish line's begun, with some big guns pitching in.
David, Lara and the Tasmanian Labor team have their priorities right. And that's why this Saturday I ask all Tasmanians, when it really counts, to vote Labor.
Let's be clear about this. Voting Green will not change the government. It just means another hung parliament.
A week of frantic rhetoric and little sleep awaits. Rowan Dix, ABC News.
A Dreamtime discovery that rewrites the history books. Millions of ancient artefacts have been found under land set aside for roadworks near Hobart. The state government's desperate to save the transport project, but Aborigines want the site given World Heritage protection.
It was work as usual today on the $180 million Brighton bypass, but its final route is now clouded by an archaeological treasure trove. The project has always outraged Aborigines, who claimed it would demolish their heritage. A 600-metre section of land near the Jordan River could now give them a shock victory. An archaeologist hired by the government has found millions of artefacts buried up to a metre underground. That shatters the record books, putting humans on the site almost 40,000 years ago.
So we've got, the oldest, most southern site anywhere in the world, so exciting for us.
It'll take another week to officially date the samples, but the Aboriginal community's demanding World Heritage protection.
The report that's come out has vindicated the stance taken by Aboriginal people.
This is possibly a very significant site in a national context, and of course we don't want to disturb that site.
The department's hoping to build a 70-metre bridge over the area, costing an extra $10 million, but Indigenous leaders say that'll ruin the cultural landscape.
This is Tasmania's Valley of the Kings. No one would dream of putting a bridge across the Valley of the Kings in Egypt.
Michael Mansell's insisting the road be diverted by 300 metres.
We are very confident that they will agree to diverting the road.
The department says it'll consider the community's demands, but the bypass route has been carefully chosen for safety over several years. It says the landscape is distinctly European and rerouting the bypass is unlikely to be viable or practical.
With the government in caretaker mode, a decision's unlikely until after the election.
A re-elected Labor government will deliver the road on time with the preservation necessary for any Aboriginal artefacts in the most efficient and cost-effective way possible.
We want to see this project proceed. It'll happen under a government I lead. I've already shown that I am prepared to sit down with the Aboriginal community.
Ironically, the ancient finding may never have come to light without the bypass. Rowan Dix, ABC News.
The Prime Minister's endured a public heckling as Labor's day ran less smoothly away from the campaign launch. And independent reports condemned the state's troubled police boat, which the opposition has promised to replace.
How are you all? How are you?
The Minister hit the hustings in Hobart's northern suburbs for serious flesh pressing, but he was soon approached by Aboriginal activist Aaron Everett about the Brighton bypass.
Why don't you grab him and then we'll have a chat in a minute.
That never happened as Mr Rudd left a few minutes later.
Both doing the runner, you don't want to deal with these issues?
On safer ground early in the day, the PM talked up his proposed health takeover. He was more cautiously optimistic about state Labor's re-election chances.
But let's not underestimate the degree of challenge in this election.
The crisis-ridden police boat is one big challenge. Back in dry dock yet again. The Liberals have obtained a 5-month-old report saying the PV Fortescue is poorly suited to offshore work and should only have a short, finite lifespan.
We can't expect our police officers to go to sea in a vessel that's been condemned as this one has been. So we need to draw a line under it. A Hodgman Liberal government will dispose of this vessel.
The retiring Police Minister Jim Cox didn't make it to Labor's campaign launch today. In a statement, he says a naval architect has helped fix the boat to the tune of $500,000 and it's done 10 patrols since the report was written.
Really not good enough, no. The boat isn't up to what it's supposed to do, and it's very hard on the crew and it should be replaced.
The Liberals have promised almost $6 million for North East roads and projects, while their leader took a swipe over poker machines. It's been revealed David Bartlett played a role in Federal Hotel's 15-year monopoly deal, which never went to public tender.
Our policy is clear. When this deed is up for renegotiation, it will be done in a fully open, transparent manner.
The Premier says it's well known he was only a ministerial advisor when the deal was done, which he says capped poker machine numbers. Rowan Dix, ABC News.
New Year's Eve in Hobart had it all, including feasting, a thunderstorm and one of the biggest crowds in years. Tens of thousands of Tasmanians took advantage of sweltering heat to celebrate the new decade outdoors.
As the sun set on 2009, no one was out in the cold. The very last finisher in the Sydney to Hobart yacht race arrived just in time.
Perfect timing. What an arrival. What a place. This is fantastic. Every time we come back here, we love it more and more.
Youngsters were thrilled by the twilight fireworks, while something even more spectacular lurked in the distance. After the wettest year and one of the hottest days on record, the heavens tore open, catching revellers on the hop. It lasted a drenching 20 minutes, then disappeared just as quickly. More than 4,000 people packed the Taste of Tasmania.
It's the best. Drink, eat and be very merry.
Sounds like Aberdeen, you know, took it in rain.
It wasn't just the steamy food and weather commanding attention.
The Bollywood dancing has been fabulous. It's so exotic and exciting and it's good to groove to.
Some came straight from the Chapel of Love.
I happened to be the groom, which was quite interesting. I wasn't expecting it, but it was great.
Back on the streets, more than 40 police kept watch. By midnight, they'd only made 6 arrests.
Senior police say it's one of the biggest crowds they've seen since the turn of the millennium a decade ago, but also one of the best behaved. They've had heat, a deluge, lightning, and now this.
We're certainly happy they've brought in the new year in the tone that we were keen for them to do so.
Revellers at Marion Bay for the Falls Festival were also well behaved. 16,000 people rocked from dusk till dawn as the live acts kept coming. Police breathalyzed 2,000 drivers this morning, twice as many as last year.
Last year we detected 31 drink drivers and this year we detected 16, so that's a positive result in itself.
But many who were caught had very high readings. Most were just happy to dance the decade away. Rowan Dix, ABC News.
The battle for handicap honours in the Sydney to Hobart yacht race has taken a controversial turn. South Australian boat Too True is the best placed yacht already in Hobart, but a protest threatens to shatter the dream. More than half the fleet's now finished, but the eventual handicap winner could still be at sea.
Too True sailed into Hobart just before 1 o'clock and into a storm. It recorded the best handicap time of the boats already finished, but that could count for nothing. Retired Tasmanian yacht She's the Culprit has lodged a protest after a collision involving Too True just after the start in Sydney Harbour. A panel of 5 international judges will hear the evidence tomorrow morning.
A very nervous and anxious wait at this stage. We have to clarify the details of all of this, and there was an incident on the start that involved a number of boats, and we just have to wait and see how that plays out.
If Too True is disqualified, Victorian boat Wicked could be the beneficiary. The identical design sailed in 40 minutes later. Its crew had plenty of sympathy for their nearest rival.
To us it would be a very hollow victory because if they beat us across the line, they beat us fair and square, and I seriously would like to see the guys win the race.
The overall winner could still be neither of them. Former divisional winner Zephyr Hamilton Elevators can snatch victory if it reaches Hobart by about 1:30 in the morning. In the Melbourne to Hobart race, Ocean Skins has taken line honours. The Geelong-based yacht crossed the line 15 minutes ahead of Veloce after a tight battle in the Derwent. The winner was lucky to overcome a tactical blunder last night.
A little bit of fatigue came in and we made a few wrong choices with sails, and we allowed Veloce to get in front.
Held up pretty well. We dropped off some pretty big waves out there yesterday, and we sort of flinched each time, but it was good fun. The crew all did a sterling job. It was great. Great race.
Jazz Player is leading the West Coast section. It's due to finish shortly. Rowan Dix, ABC News.
It's confirmed the state government's proposed Tarkine Tourism Road could further endanger the Tasmanian devil. The government's own report seeking federal approval highlights dangers to several threatened species. It's promising to manage those risks, but opponents claim the project's now fatally tarnished.
It's meant to sell, not scuttle the Tarkine Road, but the state government's bid for Commonwealth approval reads more like an own goal. The Infrastructure Department hired consultants to assess the $23 million project's environmental impact. They found it's likely to affect at least 6 vulnerable plant species and 5 threatened animals, including the critically endangered devil.
And I don't think that anyone would believe that it's worth taking the risk with the Tasmania devil and its future when there's so much other better things that can and should be done in and around the Tarkine.
Devils in the Tarkine have so far avoided the deadly facial tumour disease. The consultants paint the road as a potential death trap, saying more crossing points on the Arthur River may lead to the spread of devil facial tumour disease into new areas to the south, and there is considerable potential for increased roadkill rates. The report says there's more research on the way and the dangers can be carefully managed. It recommends reducing roadkill by putting up warning signs and encouraging tourists to drive in daylight.
You can take all the mitigation steps in the world, but ultimately you can't be sure they're going to work.
We are prepared, if required, to provide further information to the Federal Minister if that's what he wishes, but we are following due process.
The Circular Head Council, which supports the project, rejects the report.
The new road is not going to change the activity of the devil. They will still be doing what they've done for many, many years.
The public has 10 days to make submissions, with the Federal Environment Minister due to respond within 4 weeks. If Peter Garrett orders a more detailed assessment, the final decision could be delayed until well after the March state election. Rowan Dix, ABC News.
It divided a small community and became a political wedge. Now the $300 million plan for Tasmania's first canal estate has been dealt a knockout blow. After months of analysis, the Planning Commission has recommended the state government reject Walker Corporation's proposal for Ralphs Bay.
It's lingered for more than a decade, sparked community outrage, been scrapped and resurrected, became a project of state significance, and now finally been all but rejected by the independent umpire.
I've had people on the phone in tears of joy, and I think there could just be a bit of champagne popping later on.
It's not quite over yet. The Planning Commission's taking another month of submissions before giving its final verdict. But its draft report reads like a stake through the heart, saying the construction of a residential estate on the tidal flats of Ralphs Bay is an inherently unsustainable approach and would be a major and unacceptable intervention into Ralphs Bay.
Well, this is a great day for the Ralphs Bay community that spent the past 5.5 years fighting so hard to save that beautiful bay.
The Ralphs Bay conflict launched Cassie O'Connor into politics, making today an emotional one. She says there's no way back for the project.
It's always been a stinker. We always knew it was. It always was in contravention of the state coastal policy. The community never supported it.
There were almost 550 submissions on the canal development. The vast majority were bitterly opposed. The report highlights dangers to birds and fish species, as well as sediment build-up and too much noise and dust during construction. It says the project can't easily be amended to fit planning laws, and the only substantial factor in favour is that the reclamation stage of the project would most likely bring economic benefits. The developer, Walker Corporation, went to ground today but hasn't conceded defeat. In a brief statement, it says it's reviewing the draft and has no further comment. It's regularly expressed confidence in the assessment process.
We're very much committed to the guidelines, committed to the process, and we just want to get on with the job now and let due process take its course.
The Premier has the final say on the development in 2 months. He's also waiting for the final report, but issued a statement saying the government has said consistently it will abide by the umpire's decision. The Greens say the verdict's a warning to both major parties about backing big business over communities.
Our position's always been very clear. We've expressed for some time our reservations about the project.
In recent months, the Clarence City Council condemned the Walker proposal, fearing ratepayers would foot the bill for its maintenance.
From what I've read, it seems to be a fair assessment of what they've come up with, but who knows what the final report will bring.
Opponents aren't waiting, just celebrating. Rowan Dix, ABC News.
It sounds like the twist in a TV crime drama, but Tasmanian police believe they've cracked a real-life forensic first. They've caught a violent burglar with the help of a blood-sucking leech at the crime scene. DNA experts say it could lead to better evidence and more convictions.
When a 71-year-old woman was beaten and robbed in her northern Tasmanian home 8 years ago, she had a genuine silent witness. Police found a blood-filled leech at the scene and took a punt on having it forensically analysed. 7 years later, with the case going nowhere, the blood was matched to 54-year-old Peter Alec Cannon, who'd been arrested on drugs charges.
For the leech to latch onto the offender as he was probably travelling through the bush to get there, to drop off at the scene, to be found during the examination and to be able to extract the DNA sample from the blood in the leech, it's a fairly unique set of circumstances.
With DNA pinning him to the crime scene, Cannon yesterday pleaded guilty to aggravated armed robbery. Tasmania's forensic experts handle up to 7,000 cases a year, but they've never seen anything like this.
To use something in this way to get a DNA profile is a first, and there's some really good lateral thinking on the investigator's part at the scene.
Insects are commonly used to work out the timing of a crime, but have rarely, if ever, been exploited for their blood-sucking habits.
You'd think that after 8 years most people would think that they were in the clear for a crime of that nature.
With scientists now able to read DNA samples the size of a pinhead, the leech case could throw mosquitoes and spiders into the mix as well.
It certainly leads to potentially more evidence being collected from scenes, and the ramifications for that might be more convictions down the track.
Criminals wearing insect repellent could be the way of the future. Rowan Dix, ABC News.
The Prime Minister's tasted pulp mill anger, cries for help and racial tension firsthand in Tasmania. About 400 people got an audience with their leaders at the state's second community cabinet in Hobart last night. It was carefully stage managed, with the most passionate views kept outside.
With Australia's most powerful descending on a Hobart high school, the Aboriginal community came to condemn the government's so-called racist policies.
By quarantining welfare payments, stripping Aborigines of their entitlements. Danny Macklin, go back home! Leave us blackfellas alone!
They were moved on long before the cabinet arrived.
You are on school grounds. The principal has asked you to leave.
As tensions grew and spilled over.
Stop resisting,
We
please.
have a right.
You are under
to have
arrest
it.
for obstructing a police officer.
Once inside, there was protest of a different kind. The first few questions targeted logging, the pulp mill, and Gunn's relationship with the state government.
I can't believe that you couldn't be moved by the level of corruption that happens here.
The Prime Minister says jobs versus conservation's always a tough balance.
There are deeply polarised views on these questions right across Tasmania. But let's just acknowledge that as a fact.
Many locals demanded stronger emissions cuts and more clarity on emissions trading. Some gave thanks for cultural tolerance. Others made a plea from the heart.
Racism is still there. Discrimination is still there.
We can do a lot better. A lot better, and we need to.
There were some forward thinkers.
What do you think about lowering the ages of voting?
Okay. I think 9's a good age to start thinking about it.
Kevin Rudd answered most of the 14 questions, as adult literacy and hospital waiting times also got a hearing. In one of the government's safest seats, it was always a fairly cosy encounter. Rowan Dix, ABC News. 3 weeks in, the skills are up and down. These 5 to 15-year-olds are cycling, juggling and bumbling their way to becoming promising Tasmanian clowns. It's under the tutelage of a professional performer with 10 years' experience in England.
They're so quick to learn, they're enthusiastic, and that's just like goes round and round, upward spiral.
The students are working towards the Christmas parade with hopes of becoming a regular feature down the main street.
Theatrical skills are things that aren't necessarily used all the time, but there's something that can really plug into the whole tourism experience in Sheffield.
The mentor says it does require some natural physical skills to attract attention, but the life of a fool brings fun, self-esteem and surprisingly good money.
Meeting the people, getting out there, and it's a licence to communicate.
Oh, the unicycles, that's definitely the best.
Most of these budding performers are too young to have seen a big top or tasted life on the road, but they're excited by the fantasy of becoming Tasmania's first professional circus troupe.
Good stuff, it's lots of fun.
A lot of fun. Be a good time to have.
That means breaking into a scene dominated by overseas talent.
Well, it's good, it's a high standard, but I do have to say here, they don't hire enough Tasmanians.
These youngsters hope to break that cycle. Rowan Dix, ABC News, Sheffield.